Thousands of homeless people can be found on the streets of San Francisco and many other American cities, some of them grappling with mental health issues. John Blackstone looks at a pilot program aimed at helping both the homeless and the police.
San Francisco's roughest neighborhoods can seem dominated by the homeless, the mentally disturbed, and those openly using drugs.
Don't you need more police on the street to change that?
But San Francisco's Mayor, London Breed, is cutting the police budget.
We got to look at things differently. The challenges that people face are not what they used to be, and a police response doesn't solve all of these issues.
So now in San Francisco, many calls to 911 no longer bring armed police officers.
How you doing today?
Instead, dispatchers send what the city calls a street crisis response team, trained to deal with mental health issues. Stephanie Cheery, a behavioral therapist, is on one of those teams.
When someone is experiencing a mental health crisis, especially psychosis, it can look scary to somebody to see a person who's talking to themselves or yelling into the sky.
It's scary, you call the police.
And now you can call and ask for us too.
In 2019, San Francisco police answered more than 50,000 calls related to mental health.
In our city, and I think throughout the nation, a lot of extra jobs and tasks have just been given to law enforcement because there's nobody else.
Fire Captain Simon Pang is in charge of the crisis response teams, whose members come from the city's health and fire departments. They do not carry guns.
People living in the streets often have a history of complex traumas, and law enforcement, somebody with a gun, can be very triggering and potentially escalating for someone like that.
So far this year, nationwide, more than 50 people with mental illness have been shot and killed by police. One study concluded that almost 25% of fatal police encounters involved mental illness.
Having a mental health crisis is not a crime, and it's not necessarily a public safety issue. So having our team here to be able to respond to those non-violent mental health calls is critical to free up the police to address what are actually public safety concerns.
As well as a mental health expert like Cheery, each crisis response team will have paramedics like Richard Platt and Leslie Fong, and one member like Michael Marchicelli. He's called a peer counselor because, well, he's been there, done that.
You know, when somebody says, do you have a license or a degree? I think the streets and drug addicts have been my degree.
There'll be limits to what we can do when it comes to our personal interactions. Michael doesn't have some of that. He is able to use his gut in a way that we usually can't.
You look pretty good.
Thank you.
Right now.
Thank you.
It wasn't always quite like this recently?
No, actually, it was the opposite.
Earlier this year, Jermaine Reeves was living on the streets of San Francisco's Tenderloin district. In desperation, he sought help from one of the street crisis teams. They found him a place to live.
It was a godsend, and it was right on time, and it was the first people who actually listened to me.
He says he would never go to the police for help.
Like, if a police shows up right now, you guys wouldn't think anything of it. My heart would start beating fast. I would wonder, like, what are they over here for? I would start looking around to see if there's some other black people. Like, it's just not a good situation that ends for people that look like me.
With police reform now an issue across the country, several cities are developing programs like the one in San Francisco. Mayor London Breed.
So what this program is doing is taking away some calls that used to go to the police, taking some duties away from the police. Is this defunding the police?
Well, I don't like to label it. The issue here is we have to think about policing differently than we ever have before, especially in light of what we see the data shows us. The goal is to meet people where they are, to develop rapport, to have a conversation, to treat them like human beings no matter what they're going through, and to make sure that you build trust within seconds. And that could make all the difference.